Viva la quinta brigada, rumbala, rumbala, rumbala. Viva la quinta brigada, rumbala, rumbala, rumbala. Che sia cucchiata de gloria, ai Manuela, ai Manuela. Che sia cucchiata de gloria, ai Manuela.
For those that don't know, Richard Harrington was originally booked to do this. But he was called away to America for the whole of October and November, actually. And at the end of the day, it's work. You know, he had to go. He is eager to deliver his speech, but as he's not going to be back now until 4th of December, I think it is, I can't really see us doing it this year because everyone's going to be out partying then, and they will, especially this pair by the side of me. So as soon as we can, we will book him again. But Hugh has turned up.
Yes. Literally.
He was wandering outside in a car park.
I was. Yeah.
In fairness, he's absolutely brilliant. You can go to a pub, right, with anyone and they talk rubbish all around you. Go to the pub with him and he's still interesting. So...
Especially after about 4 pints.
So...
Yes, it's getting better.
Ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to Hugh Williams.
No, thank you. Who done? I'm going to stand up and speak, and I think the microphone and the cameras, this is all being filmed for posterity, or for commercial gain, one or the other. So I'm going to stand here, and it'll be about 40 minutes. I'm told there's no questions and answers afterwards, but there's always adjournment to the pub to pursue it further. So, where's my glasses? I can't see what I'm talking about here. Yeah. So Rick has left the cafe and he's chosen to go and talk to the local chief inspector about a brief profile of his career to date, while the local police go through his place looking for a certain document. You all know the scene, by the way. Anyway, I'm not S O Davies. Some people saw the poster in colour at the Crown and said, "Saw you in the Crown?" I thought, I'm not S O Davies. I'm not S O Davies. I'm not Richard Harrington. I am my own man. For some people, I'm Gareth the Gardener's brother. That's another story again. So, two orthodoxies to dispense with tonight, or maybe not. One is at Dowler School, and this being the S O Davies Memorial Lecture, and it's my privilege and humble honour to be asked to give this talk tonight, albeit as a substitute. The topic changed at least 3 times from popular culture in Merthyr. I'll be inflicting that one on you through the Merthyr Historian Volume 28, due out next month. It then became the Independent Labour Party. I'll be inflicting that upon some unsuspecting people in this room and elsewhere in due course. And in the end, appropriately, because where we've been earlier this evening, it's about Spain. And I'm reminded of the phrase, I can't remember who said it, every man has 2 nations, his own and France. But you could say the same for Spain. Every man has 2 nations, his own and Spain. Especially those people who lived at Pen-y-Waun in the early decades of the 20th century, or Abercraf, or Onllwyn, and they were mentioned this evening. I'll come back to that later on. That reference, by the way, is from the film. You all know the film, surely, Casablanca.
Yeah.
And while Rick is out of his Cafe American, talking to Captain Renault, Renault mentions to him, "I see you were gun running," and it's very vague as to where he was gun running. Was it Ethiopia, then called Abyssinia? But it could have been referring to Spain. "You were gun running as a freedom fighter." And Rick replies straight away, "And I was paid very handsomely for it." And Inspector Renault said, "But the other side would have paid you more." And that could have been a reference to Spain. This film, Casablanca, directed by Michael Curtis, came out in 1942, and there's an ambivalence there. One side paid me, but the other side would have paid me more. And this ambivalence about Spain, especially from a town like Merthyr Tydfil and the South Wales coal mining valleys, is always there. even maybe to this day. So, here's two orthodoxies to dispel with. Well, one remains. First of all, at Dowlais schools back in the late 1950s, 1960, where I was privileged to have an infant and then junior schooling, any mention of S O Davies, and we always thought he was a representative for a national oil company, S O Davies, S.O. And somebody always mentioned, because he'd heard his dad saying it, and the only thing he ever did in Parliament was say, shut that window. And that stayed with me for years afterwards. S.O., an oil representative, saying, shut that window. We now know there's way more to that person than that. And the second orthodoxy, which came out of the Honours School of History, of no meaner place than London University, note the date, 1969, 1970, 1971, was this, that the Spanish Civil War was a war of poets, of romantics, from the heart as much as from the head. It was of minor consequence. Those who volunteered had no idea what they were volunteering to go into, and it made not a ha'porth of difference towards the coming of war. It didn't roll back the tide of fascism, and it was therefore of little consequence. And I did an actual essay on that, and this orthodoxy then came from distinguished French historians, then holding a chair and a senior lectureship at London University. At 1970, and I met him in 1973 for the first time, a young doctoral student at Swansea University, Howell Francis, was putting together his PhD thesis on Wales and the Spanish Civil War, which would overturn that notion that this was a war of little consequence, of the Romantics. And you can see where the Romanticism comes in, because we have a romantic affinity with Spain. 1969, film comes out, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. It won a young, gorgeous-looking Maggie Smith an Academy Award that year. Robert Stevens was in it, Gordon Jackson was in it. And if you know the novel by Muriel Spark, and Jean Brodie has the line somewhere, give me a young girl at an impressionable age and I can make a career, I can make a life out of this attentive mind. And she's obviously a fan of Il Duce, of fascism and the art form and the discipline and the rhetoric and the culture and everything that Europe from ancient Rome was bringing into her mind. One of her students, little Mary McGregor, who had a stutter in the film, on Jean Brodie's instigation, goes off to join her brother in Spain. On the train journey through Spain, it's bombed and she is killed. And then the film makes the poignant point, her brother was fighting not for the fascists, as Jean Brodie would have him do, but on the side of the Republicans. They even mixed up the side on which he was fighting. This was a war of romantics, of poets, of a ragtag that was mentioned earlier this evening, international brigaders who had more romanticism than common sense to go to Spain, and a great endeavour to get through the Pyrenees. Mention wasn't made of the main means of transport across the Channel, a certain Captain Potato Jones, running a tramp steamer under the guise of sacks of potatoes. You're taken through the Pyrenees by guide. Hemingway's novels come in here, by the way. Again, more romanticism perhaps. And you end up in Spain on the front. And then you've got Orwell's great book, Homage to Catalonia. And every one of us should, at some point in our lives, walk down the Ramblas in Barcelona. Well, you need to take care, because that's where a hit-and-run terrorist, what other word is there for it, carnage, was brokered on the Ramblas just this past summer. I remember it in 1973. just coming off the Avenida Generalissimo Francisco Franco, who was still alive when I was there. Didn't see him, mind you. 1973. And you walk down the Ramblas and it's all shops, budgery and canary cages and pickpockets. It's one of the great avenues in Europe to this day, as is the city of Barcelona. And it's from there that Orwell paints his portrait. Laurie Lee, as I walked out one midsummer morning, ends up walking into war in Spain. You can see how the novelists, the poets, the romantics make a best fist of this war of little consequence to anybody else but the intellectual. Okay. Dowlas, in particular, I've got to mention Dowlas at least once, as some people know in this talk tonight, had not a sizable, but several hundreds of a Spanish-born population once the Dowlas Iron Company had secured from the Orcanera Iron Ore Company of Bilbao much needed raw supplies of iron ore. Local supplies were had become exhausted, and with that new securement of a raw material, several hundred Spanish came over to Merthyr Tydfil, settled on the northern perimeter of their workplace, the Dowlas Ivory Foundry, and lived in a distinctive row of housing still there to this day. And there's one at Cae Hopkin as you go down towards Abercraf, just below Onllwyn, and there's one in Abercraf itself. They were bungalow-style dwellings, and it was named, and still is to this day, Alfonso Street, either named after King Alfonso the 12th or the 13th. The locals didn't mind. He never came to visit, but there we are. And they were of a particular kind. They became, by the 1920s, Spanish anarchists. They became committed Republicans. They were imbued in trade unionism, which they found emerging in Dowlas, never actually a seedbed of the independent Labour Party. The Dowlas Iron Works made sure of that. You voted Liberal if you wanted to keep a job. But the ILP, and I can give another talk on this, the Independent Labour Party is making mighty inroads into the political structure of Merthyr Tydfil in the two key decades of the 20th century. Do the local papers, records of the ILP exist? No. You've got to go through the Merthyr Pioneer, which is online, that's Keir Hardy's newspaper, and the Merthyr Express, to get and build up a view of what was happening. This was Keir Hardy's party, the Independent Labour Party. Okay, let's take you to 1934. At the end of that year, and it was mentioned earlier on at the unveiling of the plaque, Franco, who you should bear in mind crossed from Morocco with Moroccan mercenaries, and they took no prisoners whatsoever. They flew across British airspace over Gibraltar, and the government just turned a blind eye. Yeah. On you go. And the consequences were savage. One professor of Spanish history, Paul Preston at the London School of Economics, talks of the Spanish Holocaust, the true figure of deaths between families, between warring sides, and Spain, a bit like Germany, chooses to forget or never mention the Spanish Civil War ever. They've moved on. The figure was somewhere approaching over 1 million, maybe 2 million, nobody counted. But a Spanish Holocaust ensued during and just after those turbulent years where Franco did come to power. Pablo Picasso, Spanish-born, great artist, refused point blank ever to return to his native Spain while Franco lived, and never did. Salvador Dali, his hometown was Figueras on the coast there. He remained. But Spain galvanized people. My good friend Mary Edwards, widow of John Edwards, they have in their house not the full-size picture, but a miniaturized version of Picasso's fabulous but haunting picture Guernica. The first time ever a civilian town was deliberately bombed from the air by Hitler's Condor Legion of Stuka aircraft, training, ready for war perhaps, and on the northern edge of Spain there. It's a haunting picture. Catch it online. It's available there. But 1934, at the very end, at the Asturias, Franco puts down disputing coal miners. The same month, and Gwyn Thomas, raconteur and novelist, had made this point on television, on video. He makes an alignment between the affinity of South Wales miners who are facing unemployment. They are out of work and will remain so for most of the 1930s. He links that Asturias carnage with a similar carnage back in Wales. October 1934, Gresford colliery disaster near Wrexham. 264 men die. D.T. Davies is sponsored by the Daily Mirror straight away to organise a fundraising concert at Dowlas Oddfellows Hall. There's no point in the majority of you thinking, oh, if I'd been there, I might have sung in D.T.'s great choir. It was D.T.'s ladies' choir of Dowlas, not the male voice. And Merthyr came to the assistance of Gresford straight away. Gwyn links Gresford and the obscenity, his word, of that colliery disaster, when most people in South Wales thought after Sengennydd there'd be no more. We know of one other, do we not? 1966, 21st of October. And there's a linkage with the Asturias, an affinity through Celtic linguistic roots with the Basque country, with their independence. Ships had been sailing out of South Wales port since the Tudor period down to the Bay of Biscay on a fair weather, trading produce of northern Spain in exchange for industrial goods. And that plying of trade remains right the way through the 19th century. Outward looking, capitalist, yes, free trading South Wales. I should chuck in here, what price Brexit? But you think about that one at your peril. So, Howell is redressing the balance, very much so. At that date, 1970, where the Honours School of History in London is putting forward one orthodoxy, he interviews in that same year Lance Rogers and he interviews Tim Harrington before they pass on. And he puts together a picture of South Wales galvanised for action. And of course, the romantics of the orthodoxy of the Spanish Civil War would rather stupidly say, well, why didn't you invade Germany then and roll back the tide of fascism? Well, we knew little about what was happening in Germany because our man in Berlin, the ambassador, was more or less saying everything's okay. The political orthodoxy of Westminster and of France was appeasement. We can't afford another war. And of course, Ebbw Vale, of all places, during 1934 certainly, and there's correspondence in the Merthyr Express to this end, with a Mr. Norris banging in the letters and somebody anonymously called a plain citizen rebuffing him. There's a huge plea and a following in Ebbw Vale of Italian-style black shirt fascism. They're taken in by the methodology, by the success, by the employment figures, by the new charisma of Il Duce, as was Miss Jean Brodie of that film. Watch that film again. It's beautifully acted and the dialogue is supreme. Watch Casablanca again for that one line. Yeah? And I have my good friend Lyndon Humphreys, who I met today. He's not in grand shape. He's had a replacement hip of the hip, and it's not gone too successfully. And he reminisced about the offices of the black shirts in Ebbw Vale being situated right opposite the local police station. So the police knew exactly who they were, every one of their movements, and the prime mover in Ebbw Vale was a Eugene Cross. And if you've been to rugby at Ebbw Vale, it's Eugene Cross Park. And he was a wheeler and dealer. He was self-appointed. He got £100 by some dubious means from the Labour Party. He knew if he gave it to the local workers, they would have their means benefit tested allowance stripped from them straight away. So he invested it in a shopkeeper and bought instead about 100 boxes within that 12 packets each of Woodbines, and paid the men in kind to build an open-air swimming bath. Of all the places to build an open-air swimming bath, Ebbw Vale. There's two places worth. One is Bryn Mawr, open-air swimming bath, highest town in Britain, and of course, much loved by some of us, Pant Baths, on a line with the present A465 crossing at the, I still call it the ICI point of entrance. But Ebbw Vale were taken in, or many people were taken in. So was Oswald Mosley. Fascinating figure. Head and shoulders, literally, above anybody else in the early 1930s, would have been the Labour Party leader-elect, but was taken in by the brown shirts, and they were marching through East End of London. Arthur Isles, of whom a biography is very much due, moved from communism to fascism in about 6 months flat within Merthyr. So when SO becomes MP, he won the nomination against Sam Jennings by only 6 votes, 49 to 43. The rest is history. But I always maintain to vote SO, who was backed by the South Wales Miners' Federation in 1934, although in his acceptance speech he made the point, I am the heir apparent and I will carry on all the good works of James Keir Hardie and Richard Walhead, both ILP members. But he barely got in, and to vote Labour in 1934 Merthyr Tydfil, I maintain, was to vote safe. You had Wal Hannington of the unemployed workers movement. You had the Communist Party. You had Sam Jennings and then Claude Stanfield standing for all of their lives as independent Labour Party members. And Mog Chambers reminds me, they were ILP members in Merthyr, he can remember, well into the late 50s, even the early 60s, who took on that ticket. It was a noble cause, the Independent Labour Party. That's Keir Hardie's party. Howell has done a correlation of who volunteered to go to Spain from South Wales. Merthyr sent more men than any other single place. And they were in the main, they were on the left. Communist Party, card members or associates. Some of them had been conscientious objectors during the Great War, where they had a very hard time. My good friend Aled Eirig is doing a PhD on conscientious objection during the Great War. Fascinating stuff when it's published. There were pockets of it in Dowlas, Why Are We Surprised, and elsewhere within Merthyr Tydfil. They were mainly non-conformist chapel goers. They were in the main unemployed. So here's the romance creeping in again. Was this somewhere to go to ward off what Eric Hobsbawm called the unceasing destitution of unemployment, where the only thing these miners could do was sit on their haunches all day on street corners and curse the capitalist system that put them there? I'm quoting the late great Eric Hobsbawm on that. But they went. And the rest, in a way, is history. Let's look at some details. 1934. 3 marriages take place that year. You've heard of 2 of the people involved. August, S O Davies marries Sephora. Her parents came from Gwaencae Girwen. S O Davies had been a miner's agent in Tumble on the anthracite coalfield for a spell. He's better known as agent of the Dowlas branch of the South Wales Miners Federation. Noah Ablett, one of the authors of the Miners' Next Step 1912, by which the Labour Party, the Independent Labour Party, within 5 years of its existence, is calling for the total nationalisation of the whole of the coal industry, from the cutting stage to distribution. Later on that year, there's the announcement that Nyren Bevan, who, as a great orator, elected to Parliament a few years before SO, helped S.O. Davies in his campaign in the early spring of 1934 to clinch him the seat. S.O.'s majority was 8,000 in the end, and he became pretty much unconquerable as he made the seat his own in due course. Now Bevan announces his engagement in September 1934 to Jenny Lee. And the other marriage, which some of you with long memories of Dowlas will remember, is a Dr. John Brennan, albeit from Scotland, then living in Merthyr Vale, marries Dr. Catherine Clarke of Dowlas at the end of August 1936 at Brompton Oratory in London. Esso and Sephora were married in London. I'm not sure where Nye and Jenny were married, but there's marriages taking place. In October of that year, here's opposite, a Keir Hardie memorial meeting was organised by Merthyr Tydfil Independent Labour Party. John McGovern, a Glasgow MP, was the guest speaker, and he was criticising SO because SO wanted or was trying to broker some deal by which a part of the Woolwich arsenal could come down to South Wales, to Merthyr Tydfil, it never did, and provide much needed employment. McGovern's line was, would you then, SO, go to war with these weapons of war if you were going to broker that particular deal? So there's a lot happening in 1934. It's about the lowest point Merthyr Tydfil got, the South Wales Valleys got, in terms of unemployment, in terms of cuts to the means test, in terms of destitution, poverty. So where to look for some assuaging of this dire circumstance? The males of the family looked towards Spain, perhaps. Betty Harrington, Tim's daughter-in-law, says that Tim just got up one morning and just went to Spain for 2 or so years. He came back, lucky for him, he came back, but a different man. Spain changed everything. But these men were committed to going. The journey was arduous in itself. But the cause was the ideal that if we don't make a stand against this particular type of fascism, where we have kindred folk on our doorsteps at Pen y Wern who were ready to enrol and go there as well, and some did, and one, Roman Rodriguez of Dowlas, gave his life over there. There's a mighty plaque alongside Merthyr Tydfil's plaque at the South Wales Miners' Library, which Neil Kinnock unveiled. I can't remember the date. It's made out of Welsh slate. It was unveiled on St. David's Day, I think it was early 1980s, and it's a roll call of all the names of those who fell in the cause of trying to roll back the tide of fascism in the Spanish campaign. I had the privilege in 1986, it must have been 1986, at Ystrad Rhondda Leisure Centre with a dinner organised by Llafur. That's the Society for the Study of Welsh Labour History. They changed their name slightly now. And we honoured those few members who fought in Spain at that particular dinner. And I remember befriending at various Llafur meetings through the 1970s into the 1980s, Jim Brewer of Abertrydur. I think all of that legion of heroic people have now passed on. But that was one dinner, it must have been 1986, 1936, 1986, to commemorate, to celebrate, to rejoice. And of course, at dinner, we gave each one of them a standing ovation with speeches organised by Llafur. So what of the fight itself? Quote from Howell and Di Smith's book on the Fed. Going into the streets of Trealaw and Tonapandi, in Trehavod and Porth, this is over on the valleys, with a trolley knocking on the door of people, most of whom were unemployed and destitute, pleading for a tin of milk or a pound of sugar, and there wasn't at home, facing the impoverishment that they were facing, that wouldn't make a contribution during that period to help the fight of the Spanish people. Somewhere online is a photograph of a shop in Aberdare with tins of food stacked 10 high as voluntary donations, a kind of 1936-38 food bank, if you like, of collections to send out to help the plight of ordinary Spanish people. Spain was very close to the South Wales miners' cause, for sure. The conflict itself is well written up, principally by Howell in his book, which is still in print, and he's provided an updated version, Miners Against Fascism, Wales and the Spanish Civil War. He interviewed, for example, a certain Maria Williams back in 1973, who's not in the audience tonight, but some of us know exactly who she is. And she has showed me in this very room as well membership of her father's membership card of the Spanish anarchist movement. A good friend of ours, Dr. Darrell Leeworthy from Cardiff, who's now running in my stead Adult Learning Wales lectures in this very room. The room is halved. And he's done a lot of work on the Welsh Merthyr Tydfil, Dowlais Spanish anarchists and what they were doing in the 1920s and early 1930s. He has this beautiful story of two Dowlais men getting across to Spain, and the only way they could be allowed in was by pretending they were from Argentina on a goodwill visit. So any of you who get stuck in Europe over the next few weeks or months or years, say you're from Argentina. And I said so. But and the Spanish, Welsh, English Republican press gives testimony to these people. When the Spanish came to settle in Dowlais, one person of direct descent, when I made the point, I suppose they then swelled, as I think the Portuguese and the Polish populace do in Merthyr Tydfil now, attendances at Catholic Mass. Oh, no. Most Spaniards who came from Spain didn't go to Catholic Mass on a Sunday for one simple, good, bleeding heart reason. They didn't have to. The crushing, clamping force of the Spanish Catholic Church in cahoots with Franco. And there was carnage amongst their ranks. Nuns, priests were killed. There was slaughter on all sides. This was now released from them in the freedom of South Wales, of Dowlais, Pen y Wynn, Fondsbury. We don't have to go to Catholic Mass anymore, so we choose not to. The freedom of it. I've read about flamenco-style dances held in the grounds of what was Havod House. It's now housing towards Pant, where they celebrated. The Dowlais Spanish formed themselves into the Spanish Athletic Football Club, and they played in the Merthyr League on the Bont. Imagine playing football on the Bont and falling over. You'd be lacerated for life. But there we are, in the 1930s. There's this Spanish affiliation between South Wales, between Merthyr Tydfil and Spain, certainly. And it's obvious when you see the linkage. Merthyr looked after its Spanish population very well. They kept themselves to themselves, and I've done a paper, albeit for a national pressure group called Hope Not Hate, it's called Mongrel Merthyr, I'm going to inflict that on people if not careful in a few weeks. And it's about all the international cosmopolitan benefits of people coming into Merthyr. The lifeblood of Merthyr Tydfil from 1800 onwards. Irish, Jewish, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Polish, Turkish, East European, those from the Indian subcontinent. The food wares are everywhere now. International Merthyr Tydfil. Spain is part of this. International Merthyr Tydfil, looking out and reaching out to Spain in its hour of need to try and rectify something, to try and do something in history just for once in people's ordinary lives. That they failed in a way doesn't make the campaign nothing less than heroic, memorable and honourable. And Howell, I remember, learning from his father, Di Francis, that the general strike of 1926 wasn't an abject failure. But it was a heroic stance by the South Wales miner against all the odds. The Spanish Civil War wasn't an abject failure by those volunteers who went out. The international brigaders formed themselves into national companies. So you had those from America formed up into the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Those from Ireland became the Michael Collins Brigade. I can't remember the others. But there was a nobility, there was, yes, a romance, and there was a clear-headedness as to why they were there. Ken Loach, great filmmaker, has tried putting this into portrayal in several films. Books galore have followed from Howell's primary research on what the conflict was about, how it was brokered, what went on. But if you want to start with the romantic and move to the academic, more hard-headed, read Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, still in print. Look at Hemingway's books and then the film. Look at the primer Miss Jean Brodie. They're of a time, they're of a place, and history has that fascination of being able to contradict itself once new evidence, new materials arrive through painstaking research, and many people in this room know exactly what I say about painstaking research. That is the quest for the truth. That is the quest for a better understanding of us here now. And I went to school in Dowler Central Schools and then Cyfarthfa in the 1960s with many Spanish kids who had the surnames Santos, Estebanes, Bustamante. We never thought any more about them. They were Welsh, as we were Welsh. We played soccer with them. We did everything together. But they were the direct descendants of this Spanish enclave there in Merthyr Tydfil. I can go on forevermore. The late Vera Dieth from Penydaran and lately in Dowlais, I gave an oration at her packed funeral at All Saints Church Dowlais in the summer. And she remembers her mother, who kept a shop in Castle Street, Dowlais. That's now where Dowlais Flats would be. And she went to the Spanish shops in Cardiff Bay and sent Spanish food during the mid-1930s to her besieged relatives in Bilbao. Then when Spanish dancers came over to the, quote, Troedyrhiw Musical Eisteddfod and Festival of Art, don't you wish you had been there? You've all missed it. Vera's mother acted as an interpreter, and the Spanish community of Dowlais, of whom she was one, accommodated all those Spanish guests. Spaniards remember, and they had translators on hand, listening to S O Davies and Wallhead before him, speaking at Mighty Oddfellows Hall on the middle of Union Street, Dowlais in the 1930s. The Spaniards were well up on local politics because they had none of their own. They had the freedom of not going to church. They did integrate and prove themselves to be fine workers contributing to the paltry wealth. We are talking now of Dowlas and Merthyr Tydfil in the throes of depression in the 1930s. We can go on and on with reminiscence from Spanish generations who are still active in Merthyr Tydfil, in Dowlas, who have long memories. They should write it down. We should tape record them and cherish their memories and understand better why did these ordinary men become extraordinary, risk their lives, going to Spain for a fight that seemed impossible. The bedfellows there, and this is where, again, the romantic notion of the Spanish War comes in. There was George Orwell as a Red Cross courier. There was Jack Jones to become the most prominent trade unionist of his generation, and later an unquenchable, indefatigable champion of pensions rights. When 4 pictures of trade union leaders came up on screen during University Challenge, none of the 8 people, I can't remember from which universities or colleges, none of them had a clue who Jack Jones was. The finest man I ever met, Tony Benn, on Jack Jones. Alongside him was an organ scholar from Oxford University who went out, again on a whim. You'll never guess who he was. Edward Heath. Fought in the Spanish Civil War on, for once, the correct side. It was a complete mishmash. John Cornwell, the poet, perished there. So there's this, I come back, this romance, this ragtag and bobtail, people who'd never really raised arms before, ever. And against Franco's mercenary, well-organised troop, Francisco Franco, as a military young commander, as a reprimand to one of his fellow officers, shot him dead there on the parade ground. As reprimand. That's how ruthless Franco was. And somebody made the point, and I'll end with this, that A-level, for years when I taught it at college, looked at the dictators of Europe, and every syllabus and every tutor spent ages going through Hitler and the rise of fascism, Nazi Germany, and the Holocaust, which has become a topic in its own right on many A-level syllabuses, at the expense, I might suggest, of local history. And then looked at Italy and Il Duce and the rise of Italian fascism. And there was never any time left to even glance at Francisco Franco and Spain, who outlived those other two by the best part of 30 years. Many would say the most successful of the European dictators of his and any generation thereafter. Okay, that's only a brief look, examination, partial analysis. It's a big topic. Read Howell's book, engage in conversation, look online. There's a huge amount of material. Catch up with Richard Harrington's reminiscence of his Uncle Tim. I have a beautiful photograph from his daughter-in-law, Betty, of Tim with a beret, sepia photograph, elegant, romantic, idealist, but who are we to condemn any of those qualities where we are? And we are heirs apparent on the left, on the progressive side of all things good, sound and international within Merthyr Tydfil to this day. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
That's the quickest I've ever heard him speak. Well, you're building up for the pub now, we're out. Another 4 hours in the pub he'll do now.
All romantics follow us to the inn.
Right, well, as usual, thank you very much for doing the S O Davies this year.
Pleasure arbennig.
what we do every year to whoever speaks is we give a copy of the S O Davies book, A Socialist Faith.
It's still in print. It's still in print.
No, well,
No,
we
we get all of them.
we tend to get them usually from America. Costs us a bleeding fortune, but we manage to get hold of one every year, and we've managed to get
Well,
one this
Tydfil,
year. They
thank
never knew. They're always second hand.
That's okay. That's lovely.
Written by Rob Griffiths, who, by
Griffiths.
the way, usually comes to these, but
Yeah.
he's up in London today, so he sends his apologies. Yeah. And that's one of his leaflets
Robert's
that he's
again.
done.
Thank you. Thank you. On the floor.
And before you sit down, Neil, we have got, as we always do, a present. We bought you a scarf.
Oh, well.
As it's coming up to Christmas,
Yeah.
or coming up to the winter.
I always wear one.
And this scarf is a nice grey scarf,
Yeah.
but the difference on this one is
Yes.
that on the one side, they couldn't do our banner, so what they did was the red flag. I thank
Yes, quite right.
I'll thank Arv Rogers for this, because she took the red flag off our banner and she gave it to the people, and the embroiderers have put it on, and underneath you've got the Merthyr Tydfil Trades Union Council. On the other side, if I can find it here,
Made in Hong Kong.
we've got... well then. On the other side we've got
Oh, my God.
Hugh Williams, S O Davies Lecture 2017.
Well, I'm flattered and honoured. Thank you. Well. I'll get it. You're very good pride. Very much indeed. Here, come on. Thank you much. Every time I meet Rob Griffiths, he keeps saying he's going to do an update and a reprint of this splendid book with at least one, I dare not mention the word appendix, because mine came out 5 weeks ago, with an appendix or a new chapter bringing it up to date. I keep reminding him to do so.
I thought you were going to do one.
Oh, if needs be, I will. I will, because it's much needed, much needed. Well, thank you much for these presents. My God.
I do have something else to say.
Right.
Thank you all for coming. Back in 1979, the Trades and Labour Council split, though he doesn't call it a split, but still. At that point, Merthyr Tydfil Trades Union Council was born, and Tommy was the treasurer. And ever since, he has held an officer position within Merthyr Tydfil Trades Union Council. Some 38 years, which you've got to say is an achievement. He turned 80 last weekend, and you have got to say, for most of his life, he's had this involvement with the trade unions. He's still the secretary of his local UCAT branch. He's still the secretary of Merthyr Trades Council, though he's claiming in January next year at the AGM he's standing down. In preparation for that, the banner, which he's treated as a bit of a child for some 30 odd years, came for an overnight stay to my house 2 years ago. A little sleepover it came for, and it never went back. And every so often he inquires after its welfare like a doting dad, and I keep saying, oh, the dog has chewed it, or the dog has peed on it, or whatever. But I sort of think that he does mean that he's going to stand down next year, because things keep appearing in my house. He even gave me the coveted briefcase for a month, last month, to look after. We'll see. I bet you any money this time next year he'll still be sat on this table doing this job. But I think it deserves a round of applause.
Oh, definitely.
Yes, luchamos contra los moros, rumbala, rumbala, rumbala. Luchamos contra los moros, rumbala, rumbala, rumbala. Mercenarios y fascistas, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Mercenarios y fascistas, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Solo es nuestro deseo, rumbala, rumbala, rumbala. Solo es nuestro deseo, rumbala.